Welcome back, Fiber Friends, to the Wool to Gold podcast. My name is Brian, I'm your host, and today we are talking everything sheep. If you follow me on other platforms, some of my most popular videos and kind of my most popular series in general are my favorite sheeps, like my favorite sheep in different categories, different sheep rankings, if you will. So like my top 5 cutest sheep, my top 5 weirdest sheep. Now, if you've seen that series, know that this one is going to be adapted. I am going to be pulling from those lists a lot. I'm going to be going a little bit more in depth on my reasoning as to why I like the sheep and I chose the sheep that I did, and also why I made the cut and, didn't choose some of the sheep, because I got a lot of comments about how people were upset that their favorite sheep was missing from my list. As much as it might be your favorite sheep, we all have our own reasonings for these. Please know that, I'm again not a sheep professional. I am a casual enjoyer at best. I wish it was different. I wish I was a sheep professional. Alas, I'm not quite there yet. But I'm the first to admit that these are arbitrary and based on my personal experiences interacting with a lot of these sheep breeds and, taking shearing classes and things like that. So keep that in mind that your purview on these sheep might be a little bit different than me, and that's totally okay, right? We're not here to fight it out in the comments. We're just here to have a good sheepy time. And if you're a new spinner or you've been looking or wanting to get into different types of wools or rare wools, this video is going to be really helpful to you. Maybe you'll fall in love with the story of some of these sheep and you'll go try their wools for yourself. So what are the categories? What are the rules? First things first, these are not 1 to 5 rankings where 1 is my favorite. I will be totally honest, I could not pick my favorite of the bunch. They're kind of ranked randomly. I love all of them in the group equally, so keep that in mind. In addition, our categories are going to be similar to the ones that I've used previously, but a little bit different. So we are going to be doing cutest sheep. We're also going to be doing my favorite rare wool breed. So this is kind of adapted from my weirdest sheep rankings, because I realized that all of the sheep essentially on my weirdest sheep rankings were also rare wools. So why not highlight the fact that they're rare? In that case, I used weird in a very positive way, in the way that people probably used to describe myself. A little eclectic, a little bit different and interesting. And then I'm also going to be including by higher request my favorite fine wools, or my favorite spinner's wools, for those who are very worried or very sensitive to the itch factor of wool. I've talked about it before. I'm not going to go too far into it today because you can go and check out other videos for that kind of spiel, but I'm notoriously not the biggest fan of merino, and so I'm going to give you guys suggestions on other types of fine wools that you can maybe replace the merino in your collection with. And lastly, before we start, and before you possibly click away because this video isn't super interesting to you, maybe you're not a spinner, maybe you're not even a knitter or crocheter, please hear me out and give sheep a chance, okay? If you love dogs and different dog breeds, if that's something that's interesting to you, you're gonna love sheep, okay? Sheep have a very similar thing going on where, they can be so incredibly different from one another despite all being sheep, and that's just really cool and interesting. How they got that way is often just really interesting. They have cool histories and backgrounds, so give this video a chance before you click away, just for me, for the sake of the livestock conservancy and, supporting rare sheep breeds everywhere. And now let's get into the sheep. And one last disclaimer before we begin this video, I do not claim to have taken or own the rights to any of the photos used in this video. I am simply using them to illustrate what these sheep look like and to help illustrate how different sheep look vastly different from one another. Again, I do not claim ownership of any of these photos, so please don't get me in trouble. As always, I have my handy dandy notebook here with some reference notes for you guys and some fun facts, but I might go off on a few rants. We're gonna see. I'm gonna try to not make this video super duper long, but for our first category, we are going to start with cutest sheep. And the first sheep that I want to talk about is the Ouessant sheep. So this sheep, as the name heavily implies, is a French sheep. They're located on this really tiny, rocky French island, pretty harsh environment in general, and that's really why these sheep tend to thrive. So what makes them so cute? They are unbelievably tiny. They are actually the smallest sheep breed in the world, even smaller than Softest sheep. These guys really only tend to grow to be about 20 inches at the shoulder, which I'll try to insert a reference photo that really accurately depicts just how tiny these little sheep are. I think their tiny size makes them wildly cute and endearing. I also love that they weren't necessarily bred to be that size. They are small, but they're small in a really efficient way, right? They have to be small because the environment is really, really harsh and there are very limited resources. So this sheep shines in turning very, very little into a lot. So they are a meat breed and a fiber breed. Most of the sheep are dark colored. However, the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook, which is going to be my reference mainly for essentially all of these sheep, the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook notes that occasionally they throw like a white spotted lamb and things like that, but most of them have a fairly dark fleece. These sheep, because they are like, I wouldn't call them primitive necessarily, but I do think they have some primitive traits. And then, of course, the part that everybody is curious about in terms of their fiber, they are a little bit on the coarser side with their undercoat in the low 20s and their outer coat in the mid 30s. So they're a double-coated breed. If you choose to separate those out, that undercoat is going to be very, very soft and, you know, a lot softer than the outer coat. But if you end up blending it together, you know, you get definitely a medium to coarser fiber. And then some of these sheep will still rue, which is really fascinating, which essentially means that they'll start to shed their fleece if they are not sheared in time. Next up for Cutest Sheep, obviously I had to include the Valais Blacknose sheep. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Valais Blacknose because I think this is a really fascinating case study in just how much almost not a singular individual, but a few people's passion can really like change the game for a single breed or a single type of sheep. So the amazing thing about the Valais Blacknose is it's not listed in the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook. It's not in there. Which I think is fascinating because that is the main book and reference that a lot of spinners use for finding new wools that they want to try and doing research and things like that. I say it's amazing because now that name, the Valais Blacknose, everybody knows Valais Blacknose sheep. If you are in sheep, you have definitely heard of the cutest sheep in the world. They actually have a trademark on that. These sheep are from the Swiss Alps. They do have coarser fiber, but in my opinion, they just make up for maybe that coarseness with the fact that they are just magnificent sheep. They're really beautiful to look at. A lot of the ones that I've interacted with have been on like more the docile side. However, it is important to note that these are sheep that can be horned for both the males and the females. Personally, this is a pro for me. I like to handle sheep that have horns. I feel like it gives you one more thing to grab onto. I know not to turn my back on anything with horns. However, if you own a family farm and you have small children around, these sheep are big. So they can get up to 200 pounds, which is not the biggest sheep by any means, but that is a fair size. And with the knowledge that they do have horns, I do think that like if you have a lot of little ones around, the Valais Blacknose, despite their pastoral beauty and their general docility, would I trust them around children? No, I don't trust any horned animal around children in general. So again, something to keep in mind if you are looking for a breed to invite into your life. Again, coarser side, they are shorn twice a year, which I think is really cool. They felt really well, so I personally, like, if I had a Valais Blacknose fleece, I don't think I'd actually spin it. I think I would try to keep it in the general shape of the fleece of the sheep, and then I would felt one side, the side that was cut, and turn it into like a felted sheep pelt, if that makes any sense. I really love those. I think they're really cool, and I've always wanted to do that with a Valais Blacknose fleece. They're just, because they are like a rare sheep, they are a conservation breed, justifiably so. Their fleeces do sometimes come with a pretty penny, you know, they can cost a little bit, which is fair because every Valais Blacknose sheep fleece that I see is really, really clean. And I don't think I've ever seen them coated, which is where like a sheep wears a coat to literally protect it from like dirt and debris and stuff like that, because some sheep really like to get into shenanigans. Maybe they do keep them coated, like, when they're out of my purview, but I do think it's interesting. The fiber is usually really, really clean. I don't know if that has to do with, like, the way it is, because it's kind of, like, it's drapey and silky if you've ever seen them walk. Again, they're quite a sight to see. They're quite beautiful if you ever get to interact with them in person. Next up in Cutest Sheep, this one is a personal favorite of mine. I think, like, just such an underrated baddie, the Herdwick sheep. So there's so many interesting and cool and beautiful things about the Herdwick sheep, so please hear me out here. First off, they have been depicted in so many famous paintings and pastoral settings. Like, these sheep have such classic beauty that I think cannot be understated. All right, let's just start with that. Next up, they're just interesting in their fleeces as well. So I have to make sure I get this order right. They're born completely black. Their wool will turn brown as they start to age and become larger, and eventually they'll be gray throughout their life, turning whiter and whiter, and then some of the oldest sheep are completely white, which I find that very endearing. Like, that's like the ultimate, like, you know, when dogs get like the powder donut nose, it's like the ultimate powder donut nose, powder donut sheep. That's so cute to me. I don't know. Their wool also has some really unique features. So they are double coated, but with some caveats, which I think is interesting. They have an undercoat, they have an overcoat. Sometimes there is a presence of Kemp. However, they also have heterotypic hairs, which are hairs that change consistency with the season for the herdwick. So depending on when you shear them, you can get a higher or lower ratio of softer or coarser fibers. That I found fascinating. That's pretty unique to the herdwick. There aren't a ton of sheep that do that. There are, especially the more like primitive breeds. However, that's something that's really unique to the herdwick that I think just makes them a little bit extra special. Historically speaking, they are used for a lot of like tweedy type of fabrics and fibers, and then historically a lot of their wool is also used to make like fire retardant materials. So because they have a 36 plus micron fleece, which again is pretty coarse, like that's some coarse fiber, there's no doubt that you are not going to in most cases wear this next to your skin. That being said, it would make a great like felted outer coat or something like that. It's extremely hardy, extremely sturdy. Now we're getting to my more controversial like cutest sheep choices. So these are a little bit hear me outs, all right? So hear me out, the Lincoln long wool. First, Lincoln's there's just something about like a really big sheep. I'm just gonna say it. You know what? I think they're beautiful. I like 350 pounds of just like teddy bear adorableness. It's something about, I think, the face of the Lincoln. When I see sheep in a lineup, sometimes I can struggle like differentiating certain long wool breeds that really do start to look a little bit similar to me. The Lincoln I never mix up because of that teddy bear face, that teddy bear nose. They just look so distinctive to me and really, really cute. And again, I love their size. They're just stately. They're stately sheep. And they're not just like heavy hitters in the meat department. They're also heavy hitters in the fleece department. They have some of the heaviest fleeces out there with one of the largest fleeces on record weighing 46 pounds, almost 50 pounds of wool off of this sheep with 30-inch staple length. Okay, this fiber is tough as nails. If you were intrigued by that sturdiness that I mentioned before in the herdwick, if you are looking to make an heirloom coat or an heirloom bag or something like that, you're looking for a woven fabric that is literally going to last generations, look no further. The Lincoln has your back, baby. She is, they're just cute. They're cute. They're adorable. The micron count, as you might imagine, it usually ranges 33 to 41, according to the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook. Now, here's the thing. I, as a Lincoln long wool appreciator, if you go around, you talk to some breeders, you do your research, you might be able to find some Lincoln long wool breeders that breed for hand spinners. They breed what we call a hand spinner's flock. So the micron count is actually going to be lower than the average. Okay, they're breeding for fineness. If you want to keep all your sheep breeder friends, I would suggest maybe not bringing that up because people have complicated and strong opinions about breed standards, just like dogs, right? Okay, so there's some people who would argue that certain breeds that are historically meant to be very protective, have a job, things like a livestock guardian dog, right? You don't want to breed them to be too friendly because that kind of defeats the purpose of a livestock guardian dog. Those types of debates also go on in the sheep world when it comes to like especially fleece fineness. So do your research, do what you want, seek out the fleece that you want. Maybe just don't talk about it. Keep it on the hush hush. You might have to buy a fleece from not the fleece sale. You might have to go to the barn for that, right? Because people who are breeding those types of sheep generally don't want to enter their fleeces in a competition because they're going to get points off for not meeting the breed standard. For their fleeces, being too soft. So a super soft Lincoln Longwool fleece is going to get a really low score in that fleece barn. So you're going to have to ask around. And that one scene in Broad City where Alana and her mom are trying to find like the really good knockoff handbags, it's going to be kind of like that, but you got to just roll with it. And then the last sheep on my cutest sheep list, listen, I think it's very telling that I came from a little bit of a cattle background when I say I love Columbia sheep. I love the way they look, okay? I love their silly square butts. I don't know, there's something just about the sheep that, again, is stately. It's nice to look at. It has a very just, like, clean shape to it, in my opinion. I like the way they look. I think they're funky guys, and I really do love working with Columbia wool. That's a wool that I was introduced to through Fossil Fibers, and I had a lot of fun working with it. I actually finished using the leftovers recently. It's just a joy to work with. It's a great, like, medium wool. I didn't know that Columbias and Panamas are essentially the same sheep. They're not. So in the world of sheep and sheep breeding, a lot of the times which sheep was the ewe and which one is the ram kind of dictates like the actual breed outcome. So Columbia sheep are Lincoln Longwool rams bred with Rambouillet ewes, but Panama sheep are Lincoln Longwool ewes that are bred with Rambouillet rams. When they were writing the Fleece and Fiber sourcebook, they note this too, they could not identify a Panama breeder anywhere. They could not locate one to get a sample. I'm curious, Fiber Friends, does anybody know somewhere that has Panama sheep? Like, did we locate kind of a herd? Are they bringing back the breed in any way? I'm curious. I didn't really do any follow-up research on that. I'm kind of just asking you guys. But yeah, I love Columbia. The fiber can range from 23 to 31 microns. And it tends to be really lofty, crisp fiber, which I love. Like, I love a lofty medium wool. I think a Columbia wool, especially if blended with something that, like, does add a little bit more softness to the whole thing, could make a really great sweater yarn. A really, like, fluffy, shows off cables well sweater yarn. Our next category are my favorite rare wools. So this one's kind of adapted from my weirdest sheep list, just because even though in the beginning I, had a disclaimer, I was like, I mean weird in the good way. Weird in the way that, like, all hand spinners are kind of a little weird, kind of a little, eccentric and different. People still got a little offended. Result, we're going to call it Brian's favorite rare wools because they were all rare wool sheep anyway. And I'm going to start with the Santa Cruz Island sheep. So I recently purchased a Santa Cruz Island fleece, and if you want to see me unbox that and you want to learn all about the Santa Cruz Island sheep in general, you want to know why they made the list, go check out that video. I'm going to put it down below. While you're checking that out, don't forget to like, subscribe. If you think somebody else in your life would enjoy this video, maybe send it to them. Next up in my list of favorite rare wool sheep is the North Ronaldsay. So you guys are going to notice a trend here where I'm going to mention a rare sheep, and I'm also going to plug that, like, if you know somebody who can get me an entire North Ronaldsay sheep fleece, drop a comment down below. Maybe send me a DM. We can make a deal, okay? So North Ronaldsay sheep are quite possibly, like, I know I said I didn't have a favorite out of all of them, but these guys, they really, like, have my heart. So they are just, like, hardy ass sheep, okay? These guys survive on a 2.7 square mile island, the Scottish island of North Ronaldsay, and they survive predominantly on seaweed. So they didn't always survive mostly on seaweed. Obviously, they used to be kept by the people of the island. However, at one point, the people of the island ended up building sort of like a wall around the island to help protect the village from, like, the rocky shores and the waves and the flooding and things like that. And the sheep were put on the outside of that wall, forcing them to increase their intake of this super iodine-rich seaweed. I say iodine-rich because when you take these sheep off of this island and they are not given, like, the appropriate iodine supplements, they immediately pass away. They are meant to be on the island of North Ronaldsay. Another interesting fun fact about these sheep is that when you shear the sheep and you get the fleece and you wash it, even though they are not greasy sheep at all, you lose about 50% of the weight of the fleece because of all the salt that you take out of that fleece when you scour it. Otherwise, what you can expect from a North Ronaldsay fleece can really vary and range. First, it's a mixed double-coated fleece, so you're gonna get a lot of different lengths of fiber and kind of a mix of different like coarsenesses. Some reports have stated that like the North Ronaldsay fleeces can be very, very fine, especially if you kind of separate out the finer fibers from the coarser fibers, but obviously some of the fleeces are just like on the coarser side in general. And of course, just like many primitive breeds, these sheep used to rue, but in a modern day, they are rounded up on the island and sheared by the community. Next up in my top rare wool sheep is going to be the Gulf Coast Native. So if you've been with the channel for a while, you know I processed like 8 pounds of Gulf Coast Native over these past 10 months, and it has been an absolute pleasure. This sheep is really cool, really interesting. My heart always goes out to sheep that can really thrive in wet, boggy, swampy environments, which is one of the really cool things about the Gulf Coast Native. There are other sheep like the Florida Cracker Sheep that also really thrive in environments like these, but sheep like the Florida Cracker Sheep tend to be a little bit goaty, definitely have coarser fiber. The Gulf Coast Native can actually range fairly fine. In the Fleece and Fiber Source book, I think the lowest micron count they report is like 26 microns. However, just like how you can get hand spinners Lincoln long wools, there are breeders out there who are breeding like definitely more like 26 microns, I'd say. I'd roughly estimate, as not a professional, like a 24 micron count Gulf Coast Native fleeces that are definitely on the finer side. It's so much fun to work with. Again, this is a lofty fiber. It's not as crunchy as like and crisp as a Columbia wool. I would really compare it more to like a Corriedale, where depending on the sample, it's like almost a fine wool. The fleeces can really range in their weight, again, like 4 to 6 pounds is what's reported, but the fleece that I bought was easily 8 pounds, but again, it came from a finer flock that was bred to definitely have, again, finer qualities, which sometimes that does impact the sort of like overall denseness of the like follicles per square inch of skin. We've talked about this before, right? I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but with the fineness of wool often comes a little bit more density in the wool as well, right? That makes sense because more follicles can fit in a smaller area. But then oftentimes too, with finer wools, we tend to want more of that wool. So we will raise the sheep to have as much, like have the wool as like densely packed as we can get it on the sheep, if that makes any sense. So occasionally that does occur with that kind of breeding, and preference for finer fleece does occur with the Gulf Coast Native. Again, I would not recommend maybe telling your like real close sheep friends about who you're getting these real fine Gulf Coast Native fleeces from. But again, that business is between you and your God and no one else. I will note too that in my experience, Gulf Coast Native is exceptionally easy to wash clean. It was one of the easiest to clean fleeces of 2024 for sure. Next up, the Teeswater sheep. I love Teeswaters. I think just by looking at a photo of them, you can understand why. Like, they're regal, they're shiny. If you've ever had the pleasure, the good grace of seeing a Teeswater run, I mean, that's all anybody needs, in my opinion, to be convinced to love this sheep. Long, lustrous locks. Okay, these locks are some of the longest too out there. Oftentimes these sheep are shorn twice a year because their locks can range from 12 to 15 inches. Okay, a whole foot or more of hair attached to these sheep. They are a larger sheep. Okay, I will admit that while these sheep are some of my favorite, temperament-wise, these guys cannot, should not, will not be trusted. I do find them to be a little bit rude. It's why, like, I always hem and haw about including them on this list. I love their fiber. They're so unique. They're such unique weirdos, and there's no doubt about that. However, they're really striking. Their fiber also takes color so well. If you've ever worked with Teeswater locks, like, they're so fun to work with. All of that being said, they've got some sass. They've got some sass on them. I really tried to avoid putting sheep on the list that that had a ton of sass, but this one made it anyway. Because you know what? If I was that beautiful, I would act that way too. And then the last sheep that's going to make my werewolf favorites, I don't think this is going to come to as a surprise to like any spinner, the Navajo churro. I think Navajo churros, they have a really beautiful history. The fact that we still have them around, and indigenous people made such an effort to keep these sheep despite the fact that the US government tried to completely wipe them out on more than one occasion, mind you, too, is truly just a testament to like these sheep are so amazing. And you want to know one thing that I find kind of like almost the most intriguing and like fascinating is I've put hands on some really interesting. If you've never touched a Navajo churro fleece, I really recommend it because first, it's not like anything else I have ever touched in my entire life. Okay, it's a primitive sheep with a varied staple length. One of the oldest sheep in North America. One of the things that make the sheep so unique is that, and like the wool itself so unique, is that it's really, really strong. It can be exceptionally fine depending on the fleece that you actually get. And it's double coated, but the fleece tends to feel single coated, which if you've never worked with Navajo churro, you're not going to understand what that means. But essentially what that means in hand spinners is it's a pleasure to spin. It is so easy and natural to just spin Navajo churro. Something about it is just like, again, it's a really amazing fiber, and it can be exceptionally fine. So here's the thing. It's usually made up of a few parts. You have the 80% of it is going to be the undercoat. This can be 10 microns. 10 microns. Okay? We're talking like that's like cashmere plus soft. Okay, that's crazy soft. There's the outer coat, which is 10 to 20% of the fiber usually, and that's usually like 35 plus microns, right? So that can be very coarse. And then you have the kemp, which can be like 5%. I have not run into a lot of like super kempy Navajo churro in my experience. Just personally, I don't know if that's like something exceptional. But one thing that's interesting, there's a lot of interesting things about the Navajo churro, so I'm gonna like spit some facts. One thing is that we as like, or at least I, as somebody who is not of an indigenous, does not have an indigenous background, and doesn't have like the in with any indigenous folk who can hook me up with the creme de la creme. Oftentimes, in most cases, in almost all cases, a lot of Navajo churro fleeces, the best of the best, the softest fleeces, are kept within the community. I would never get to work with something like that, and maybe, you know what? Maybe that's for the best, right? Because like that's not my right to work with the creme de la creme of these fleeces, but they're kept within the community to be worked with and woven. And I think that's really cool and interesting and beautiful. I wouldn't necessarily call that a closed practice, but I find things like that are closed practices like really interesting in the most respectful way possible, obviously because they're closed and I don't have any business being there. Again, there were a few times, one of them in the 1800s, but then later on there was another time where essentially like the US government tried to completely wipe out the Navajo churro as we know it. And in fact, they tried to improve and improve upon and replace the breed, like give the Navajo people better Navajo churro sheep, which immediately failed because the sheep could not handle the conditions that they were under. They were producing like too much fleece and too much meat for these really harsh environments that the Navajo people were forced to live in by the US government, mind you, okay? So all the sheep passed away. Luckily, the Navajo people did their best to like keep some of these sheep in secret and like maintain the breed, and so they were able to use those to rebuild the flocks. But yeah, there's just so much interesting stuff to know about this sheep. And I do think it's kind of underrated. I don't see the fiber used a lot because I see a lot of people overgeneralize. They're like, well, that's a coarse fiber. If this is arguably one of the easiest primitive fleeces, in my opinion, to like sort through without combs, okay? I think it's worth it. I think it's really fun to work with, and the more I talk about it, the more I am convincing myself to pick up a Navajo churro fleece this year, and dye some up and play with it for you guys. And now, fiber friends, we're kind of at the bonus section. We're at what a lot of people requested they wanted to see added to this video, which is my favorite list of fine wools, okay? Replacements for merino. And before we start this section, I did want to read this out from the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook for anyone who dare challenges me about how merino is not the supreme of all supreme fibers, okay? Understand. The ubiquitous nature of merino wool in the marketplace and the fact that it is processed industrially in such massive quantities might give you the impression that merino is always merino, that it's a single, consistent type of soft, fine fiber. Not so. All merino falls within what is generally considered a fine range of wools, and it can be used for next-to-skin wear, although the softness levels vary noticeably. The span from the finest merino wool to the coarsest merino is wider than the range of most other breeds, running from 11.5 microns to up to 26 microns at the upper end. There are ultra-fine merinos, there are strong merinos, coarser and more durable, and every step in between. Unless you seek out the finer fibers, either in the fleece or seeking labeled yarns from Tasmanian merinos or specific commercially prepared yarns and fabrics, you will see that most merino falls between a 20 to 25 micron breed range. With this quote in mind, this is my pitch, okay? American raised wool is always going to have it's going to carry less of an oil cost for the environment than the stuff that we're importing overseas. A lot of people who have an issue with the wool industry, with like unethical practices like museling doesn't occur on US sheep. It exclusively occurs in places like New Zealand and Australia. I'm just saying it like it is, and it is exclusively with merino sheep, okay? That's almost like a breed-specific practice. In addition, these sheep that are raised here in the US, these breeds, they have merino genetics, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. So they're not that far removed from merino sheep. They've simply been bred and adapted to be better suited for the environment here, so that they don't need to take as many antibiotics and things like that, and you just have healthier, happier sheep overall. So here we go. This is my speed run of my top 5 favorite fine wool sheep. So first things first, the one wool that is a little controversial here because it's not technically a fine wool, it's a medium, but Corriedale. So Corriedale sheep are essentially a Lincoln long wool and merino Leicester sheep cross. The micron count can range from 23 to 31. It is consistent though throughout the fleece. So if you have a fleece that is 23 microns, it's essentially going to be 23 microns throughout the entire fleece. Usually those fleeces can weigh anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds. I thought I was working with a big one that was 10 pounds, but I guess I wasn't. I guess I actually got a pretty small Corriedale fleece in the grand scheme of things. And if you were ever curious what the actual connection between a Corriedale and a bond is, essentially a bond is when you have a Lincoln long wool ram and a merino ewe, and a Corriedale is when you flip those two. Next up, we have Cormo. Why am I putting Cormo next? Because Cormo is what you get when you mix a Corriedale with a merino, just like the name implies. Every Cormo I have ever put hands on has been exceptionally soft, and I actually loved learning about Cormo sheep. I have a new appreciation for them. So I guess what they were shooting with Cormo was to get one of the most consistent fleeces and consistent sheep possible. So the range count on their microns for this sheep is 17 to 23 microns. First, that's such a small range for the micron count to be. That is so unique to the Cormo. One of the reasons for this is because they use computer analysis to optimize the fleece yield to the frame size of the sheep, which I just think that's really interesting. I love when you get to actually hear about and see the influence that science has had on farms and on livestock and stuff like that, because there's a grave misconception that farmers are not really smart people, when in fact they're really smart and they're feeding the entirety of America. So their job is probably harder than you. Go thank your local farmer. But yeah, these sheep are really cool. The fleece sizes can range from 5 to 12 pounds, so you know, you can definitely aim for a smaller fleece. But just like any fine wool fleece, it is going to be greasy, so just keep that in mind. You're going to spend a lot of time scouring that bad boy. After that, we have another one of my favorites, especially recently, a sheep that I have really fallen in love with is the Polworth. Okay, so 9 to 13 pounds on the fleece, so definitely bigger fleeces, but don't get as big as the Corriedale. 3 to 7 inches on the staple length. So some Polworth, in fact, a lot of the Polworth that I have worked with has been definitely on the longer side for fine wools. So longer than 3 inches. I feel like a lot of the times I get like 3.5, 4, and that's a really nice place for me compared to like some merinos that are like 3, and I don't like 3-inch wool. I feel like that's not a sweet spot for me personally. Polworth I always find to be like a really easy introduction into fine wools in general, because it's not as slippery as merino. I feel like it's kind of a stepping stone. If you insist on starting your spinning journey with a fine wool, let it be Polworth. Please, please, please don't let it be merino. If you insist, if you need it to be merino, like, make it Polworth. Like, that's as far as I'll go, bro. That's gonna be my suggestion to make your life just not terrible and not a struggle. I forgot to mention too, the micron count on Polworth generally ranges from 21 to 26 microns. And then next up, a fine wool that I would just like to spin more of in 2025 personally, Targhee wool. Targhee is what you get when you cross a Rambouillet ram with a Corriedale Lincoln long wool ewe. So they were essentially bred to thrive in the US West and in the Great Plains. They were developed by the USDA. Again, I know there are some people who like have a lot of feelings about like genetic modification and things like that, and breeding animals for certain things, but at the end of the day, like, that's like good livestock husbandry. Like, we want animals to survive, right? And we're going to put them in these different climates, and that's why I think it's so important to retain the genetics of these animals and these sheep and these cattle and all of these different livestock that thrive in really harsh environments, because I truly believe as an environmentalist that the earth is only going to get harsher, and so we need to have this backlog of genetics, almost like the seed bank. That's what the livestock conservation does. If you were ever like, why does this man never shut up about the livestock conservancy? It's because, especially here in the US, like, that's our seed bank for livestock, okay? They are doing a lot more for food security than most like government agencies and things like that. And that's why I stan the livestock conservancy so hard. But Targhee are great because they're extremely soft, but the fiber is really handleable and lofty. It's so squishy. I remember I was spinning it and I was like, dang, what a squishy fiber. And then I washed it and I thwacked it, and it's so squishy and just naturally stretchy. I just think it's really fun to work with. If you were to toss a little bit of nylon in there, I genuinely think it would make a really nice sock blend. I feel the same way about Polworth though. The fleece sizes range from 10 to 14 pounds. The staple length is generally 3 to 5 inches, and it is usually 22 to 25 microns, which I think is pretty dang good. Also, in every case that I have seen with all of these fibers, honestly, they take color exceptionally well. I would argue that Corriedale takes color the worst out of these. Maybe some Cormo takes color really well, some doesn't. But I'd say like Corriedale probably takes color the worst in my experience out of all of these, and it still takes color really, really well. Actually, I forgot the bonus fine wool that I was going to give you guys, that's also a rare wool that I kind of wanted to mention, not in passing, but I kind of talk about it a lot on here, and I have in the past, is CVM, the California Variegated Mutant, Rommeldale. Okay, the terminology surrounding the CVM, the Rommeldale, is literally constantly changing. I used to work in entomology, okay, where the jargon was always changing. Never have I seen people hem and haw so much over the terminology around some sheep, okay? But there is no doubt that it is so soft. It is so beautiful. It's a very lofty wool. I actually have some I still have some CVM wool that I need to like finish washing. If you can believe it, I have a little bit more to wash and then like finish processing as well. But it's usually 21 to 25 microns, 6 to 15 pounds, and 3 to 6 inches. So it can be a little bit on the longer side if that's something that you're seeking. If you do want something that's a little bit longer and drapier and a touch coarser, definitely more of a medium wool in my experience, BFL is always a good option. But I could ramble for literally hours and hours and hours about wool and about sheep. So if you guys liked this, if you liked this episode, if you liked this segment, tell me about it. If you feel like you want to see me talk about more sheep, leave them down below. The last thing I'm going to leave you with are the bonus sheep that I did not include in, I'm only going to talk about 2 of them, okay? I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. One of them that I did not include in my favorite rare wools is the Manx Loughton, and one of the reasons that I didn't include it is simply because I feel like there's just so much Manx Loughton history that I could do like a whole episode on it. And I'm also, by not putting it in the list, I'm almost like, I really think that's the fleece that I can get my hands on this year, right? Last year, I got a Santa Cruz Island sheep. That's what I was shooting for. I got one. I think the Manx Loughton, I'm going to be able to get one this year. I'm really going to try. And as a result, I'm kind of like, you guys will learn all about the Manx Loughton when I talk about it in that episode about the fleece. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Because I really do feel like the North Ronaldsay is like a shot in the dark. There are so few of those every year for obvious reasons, and so the chances of me getting one are slim to none, but that's okay. And then the sheep that everybody was mad that I did not include in the Cutest Sheep selection was the baby doll Southdown. And this is why. Okay, so first, I like Southdowns. But baby doll Southdowns, in my opinion, I'm going to say this so quiet because people are going to be so mad at me. But like, and I have no evidence to support this. They could be perfectly healthy sheep. Although I know I've talked to a lot of like farmers and ranchers who are like, those sheep, more than any other sheep in the world, just want to unalive themselves. Like, they're like BFLs. They're not sturdy boys, okay? You didn't hear it from me. I'm saying it real quiet. They kind of, I don't know, like, why are they so small? Like, why do they need to be that small? A lot of other small sheep, you noticed when I talked about the Waisant sheep that they need to be small because the environment that they're in literally doesn't have food on it. Okay, baby doll Southdowns, I just feel like, I'm like, why did we make them like that? Why did we make them small in that shape? Like, to what benefit is it? Because Southdowns are already pretty handleable sheep, if we're being honest here. And then, like, what, you need them to be, like, extra small, so they're extra a pain in the ass to shear. And that's something that people came for me about in the comments. They were like, well, why does shearability impact the cuteness? Because this is my sheep ranking. This is my channel. If you disagree, go make your own sheep ranking. Fight your case for the baby doll Southdown. Every baby doll Southdown that I've met has been kind of a menace, low-key. I feel like they're in perpetual toddler brain territory. Even the adult ones are like not fully grown. I know for a fact that they can't count their own lambs, okay? I'm just gonna say it. They've lost a lot of their primitive instincts, so they don't have like the best herding instincts. I say that warily because like they're sheep, they'll herd together. I'm just saying, like, I've heard this from people who have kept them and now they don't keep them anymore, okay? I know a lot of farms that used to have baby doll Southdowns that don't anymore. They're cute, but they're a pain in the ass to shear, okay? Shearers hate to see them coming more than any other sheep, okay? Maybe a Lincoln, okay? But that's the thing. Imagine the fact that those little baby doll Southdowns send the same shutter down a shearer's spine that a 350 pound, 46 pound, like, fleece in wool weight, okay, on top of that 350 pound sheep, all right, that's 400 pounds. That shutter, same shutter, okay, same amount of time spent shearing those sheep. Same amount of difficulty. I mean, not the same, obviously, but like, I'm just reporting from my experiences what I feel, and I don't know, like, they're cute, I guess, but like, for all those health problems, they remind me of pugs, or like, not even of pugs, because I've seen well-bred pugs. You know what they remind me of? They remind me of exotic bullies, and I'm sorry if that offends anyone. I'm sorry if anyone is like, I have an exotic bully. I have baby doll Southdowns. They're perfectly healthy. That's great. That's wonderful. You could never catch me. You will never catch me with owning those sheep. I'm just speaking my truth. I'm just speaking my truth, okay? Okay, so that's all for now. That's all I'm gonna give you guys on sheep. It's really it for now. Again, if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for all of the newcomers that we have had around here. I'm glad you guys are enjoying. Be on the lookout for that sweater video because it is coming. I am almost done with the sweater. I just have to finish the ribbing around the neck, and I am going to do that right now after I am done filming this video. So I'll see you guys next time.